However, we have to get to first why it is that the Byzantine Empire, our guys over here, were like, hey, everybody living over here, we could use your help. Why don't you guys come on over and we could use your help and then we'll help you take over Jerusalem. Why were they asking for that? Well, what ends up happening is on your map, you can see how there's this blue area right here. However, there's going to be a big battle that's going to change these boundary lines, this territory is owned by the Byzantine Empire and the Turks. Let's go ahead and first, though, and make a bullet. And we're going to write down Seljuk Turks. So go ahead and make a bullet and write down Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks are originally from, you guys have all done a map with me before, so you guys are all familiar with Turkmenistan. The area of Turkmenistan is kind of the area where the Turks were originally from. The Turks kind of moved in from that area of Turkmenistan, and they came around and eventually moved into the area that's called modern-day Turkey. They also moved into the Middle East areas, and they ended up kind of conquering the area and taking it for themselves. We're going to call these guys the Seljuk Turks, or just kind of differentiate them from the other Turks. They're called the Seljuk Turks. And after you have the Seljuk Turks, we're going to write down the big battle they get into with the Byzantine Empire. And that's going to be in 1091. So make a 1, write down 1091, and then write down Battle of Manzikert. So we got 1071, not 1091. 1071, Battle of Manzikert. So we got 1071 equal sign, Battle of Manzikert. At the Battle of Manzikert, the Byzantine Empire and the Seljuk Turks get into a big battle for control of modern-day Turkey. In that big battle for control of modern-day Turkey, the Byzantines end up losing. And when the Byzantine army ends up losing, the Seljuk Turks then gain control of Turkey. Go ahead and write down Byzantine loses. So this that word right there. All right. So 2, Byzantine lose. All right. So let's write down 2, Byzantine lose. And when the Byzantines ends up losing, the territory they lose control of is they lose control over Turkey. All right. So we're going to write down lose Turkey for number 3. We're going to write down lose Turkey for number 3. And we talked about this before. Turkey, why is it called Turkey? Because it's named after the Turks. So when the Turks win the Battle of Manzikert, they take over control of modern-day Turkey, and modern-day Turkey is named after the Turks because they're the ones that live there now because they took it from the Byzantine Empire. After you're set with number 3, next thing to talk about. So this area right here, this pink area that's all right here, this area is all lost by the Byzantine Empire to Turks. So this blue area then encompasses all this area. So they end up taking all that away from the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine Empire is just left with this pink area right here. However, that pink area was under threat because these guys over here in gold, the Vikings, right? So our guys that are Vikings, they invaded and were trying to take over all this territory. Eventually, the Byzantine Empire is able to push them out and push them back over to southern Italy, the Duchy of Apulia. However, they're extremely weak at this point in time and can't retake over this territory from the Turks because, well, they just fought a war against these guys, and they can't reattack these guys because these guys are over here and could then attack them on the other side. So it creates it puts them in kind of a position that's not very beneficial to themselves. So it kind of puts them in a poor position. So we're going to talk about the Normans next here. The Normans are all those Vikings. Okay, so the Viking group that controls southern Italy, the Duchy of Apulia, those guys are called Normans because they're kind of, that's the area they're from, is the Norman area. So we're going to head and we're going to make a number 4. All right. And we're going to write down Normans, and then we're going to write down conquer southern Italy. All right, so Normans, conquer southern Italy. So Normans, conquer southern Italy. Write that down for number 4. So they could take control of southern Italy away from the other folks that were in the area. And also the Byzantine Empire did own some territory there too that was also taken away from them by the Normans. And then the Normans tried to take away Greece, but the Byzantine Empire was able to defeat the Normans in Greece and push them out. All right. So we need to write down the guy who's in charge of the Byzantine Empire because he is important. Go ahead and make it number 5, and we're going to write down Byzantine Emperor Alexos Comnenus I. Sometimes it's written as Alexos I Comnenus. So either way is fine. But go ahead and make a 5 and write down Byzantine Emperor Alexios First Comnenus. So write that down for number 5. The symbol for the Byzantine Empire is this symbol down here. All right. So those are double-headed chicken griffin there. All right. So that's our symbol for the Byzantine Empire at this time period. All right. And after you have that set, the thing that we have to write down for him that's important, we're going to make a number 6. We're going to write down ask Pope for help. So we're going to write down ask Pope for help. We're going to write that down for number 6. So because he's in that position of having Turks on one side and Normans on the other side, he's going to ask the Pope for help. And he says, hey, Pope, if you help me out to take over Turkey back, I'll help you to take over Jerusalem from the Turks that currently control Jerusalem. And the Pope is all about that because there was a whole bunch of wars going on in Europe. And he's like, you know what? Instead of us, Christians killing each other, maybe go kill some Turks instead. So the Pope is really all for it. And as I said, there was also some propaganda going about that Christians were getting murdered they were going on visits to Jerusalem, and there was propaganda going about how they were getting murdered on the way there by the Turks. And so that also was a big thing as well for Pope Urban as well. Let's go ahead and make a bullet and write down Pope Urban II. So go ahead and make a bullet and write down Pope Urban II. So Pope Urban II is the Pope during this time period in 1095. And as Pope, he gives a big speech on November 26th of 1095 in Clermont. Go ahead and make a 1 and write down November 26th, 1095. So on November 6th of 1095, Pope Urban II gives a big speech in Clermont. And in that speech, he calls for Christians to pick up the cross and to go to Jerusalem and to retake it over for Christianity. And he gives a big rallying cry of Deus Vult. Deus means God, and Vult means wills it. So basically, Deus Vult means God wills it. Okay. And when he gives that big speech, like I said, he calls for a crusade to Jerusalem. Go ahead and make a 2 and write down calls for crusade to Jerusalem. To encourage people to go on this crusade, the Pope ends up saying that anyone who goes on crusade will get a penance. A penance means you get all your sins removed. So it doesn't matter if you robbed someone or if you killed someone, all your sins get removed and you get to go straight to heaven. So that's what a penance is. So it takes away all your sin and you get to go straight to heaven. And there were people that were preparing to go on the crusade. There were several nobles and lords that were preparing, but it takes a long time to get military forces together. While those forces were getting together, there was another group of people that decided to go without the proper military forces, and this is called the Peasants Crusade. Go ahead and make a bullet and write down Peasants Crusade. So the proper military forces would have been led by like knights and nobles would have been the proper military forces. And a knight at this time period is someone that owns land. There's people that live on their lands. They have money. They buy their own horse, their own armor, and such. The Peasants Crusade is just made up of people that were, well, peasants. They didn't have their own weapons and armor, but they might have had some type of object which they could have used as a weapon. Now, there were some proper knights that go on the Peasants Crusade, but the Peasants Crusade is mainly made up of peasants, people who aren't trained in combat. Right? Knights train year-round in combat, and there are other professional soldiers as well that do train or at least do guard duty year-round. Go ahead and make a number 1, and we're going to write down led by Peter Hermit and Walter de Penniless. So the Peasants Crusade is led by Peter de Hermit and Walter de Penniless. Those are two people that lead the Peasants Crusade. Peter Hermit went around from place to place in France, giving big speeches and encouraging people to go on crusade. So that was led by Peter de Hermit. So he was a big priest, kind of went on talking about stuff. Walter de Penniless was a proper knight who joined the Peasants Crusade, and he's going to be kind of the main military leader of the Peasants Crusade. However, the Peasant Crusade does suffer from a lot of poor leadership. They constantly end up attacking people and stealing their stuff. It's kind of a big problem. It's more of a big mob that's moving around and not really a proper military force. one of the first ones, or one of the first people they end up killing, is a whole bunch of Jewish people along the Rhine River Valley by Worms, Germany. Go ahead and make it 2. Massacre Jews. So what ends up happening is the Peasants Crusade, they don't have money and supplies and so forth. They need money and supplies. So what they end up doing, instead of getting that stuff for themselves properly, and having that money with them before they began, they end up a lot of time attacking people as they went along and then picking up money and supplies that way. And this becomes a big problem because they end up targeting people in the Christian areas that's the same people, same places they're supposed to be representing when they're trying to take over Jerusalem. And instead, they end up kind of killing a lot of people along the way. And so it's just kind of this big mob. And eventually, this big mob gets to Constantinople. And Alexo First Comnenus does not let this big mob of people into his city of Constantinople. He's like, no. He's like, you guys can stay outside my city wall. Why don't you wait for the proper armies to get here? And then when they get here, you guys can join them. And then you guys can go over to Alexis Comenius does like. He's like, hey, Peter Hermit, you're cool. You can stay with me in my palace, but everybody else needs to stay outside my city walls. However, there's still problems. There's people that are part of the Peasants Crusade that end up getting into the city. They end up stabbing people, stealing their stuff. It becomes a big issue, and eventually Alexis First Comnenus is like, no, get out. So he ends up putting them on boats and sending them over to Turkey and just being like, hey, you guys enjoy. And he ends up just letting them do whatever in Turkey. And he's like, look, I'll come over to Turkey once the proper military forces get here, and then I'll jump with them, and I'll come over here. Peasants Crusade, though, wasn't willing to kind of wait around for Alexis First Comnenus and the proper First Crusade to actually show up. So they end up taking over this fort by the city of Nicaea, which is kind of this big city in Turkey. And half the people that are part of the Peasants Crusade, they go to the city of Nicaea, they end up attacking kind of the area around it, or raiding really, and they end up kind of stabbing people, stealing people's stuff, bringing it back to the fort and being like, hey, we got all this cool stuff. And then the other half of people that were in the Peasants Crusade, after seeing one half get a whole bunch of cool stuff, they're like, oh, we want cool stuff too. So then they end up going to the city of Nicaea. When they get to the city of Nicaea, by that point in time, the person that the ruler of that area had gotten his forces together, and he had attacked the other half of the Peasants Crusade, and he captured them. He ends up torturing some of them and getting them to write a fake letter over to the rest of the Peasants Crusade that was hanging out at the fort, being like, hey, we got control of the city. Everything's all good. You guys should come join us. It's all good. And so then Walter the Penniless, he goes with the rest of the Peasants Crusade. They go over to the city of Nicaea. And when they get to the city of Nicaea, Turks are there waiting for them. It's a surprise attack. It's a trap. Bam. Walter the Penniless gets shit by an arrow. Dead. And then the rest of the Peasants Crusade gets captured and sold into slavery or killed. Peter Hermit ends up surviving, and he goes back to Constantinople, and he's hanging out with Alexios First Comnenus. So that's how the Peasants Crusade comes to an end. They end up killing a whole bunch of people on the way, stealing their stuff, and eventually when they do get to Turkey, they end up getting into a fight with the Turks. Doesn't go well. Turks end up capturing all of them or killing them. Go ahead and make a number 3 and write down Peasants Crusade raids Nicaea and is defeated at Nicaea. So I'm going to write that down for number 3. So number 3 raids Nicaea and is defeated at Nicaea.